ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel. Today we're talking about the 5-2 San Antonio Spurs. Last night, they beat the Minnesota Timberwolves. They actually held the Minnesota Timberwolves to 98 points. And they were missing very valuable players, guys like Devin Vassell, who is on his way to a breakout season. They were missing Josh Richardson. They were missing Jeremy Sohan. It wasn't a pretty game in any way, shape, or form. They shot well from downtown. They rebounded greatly. Keldon Johnson did his thing. We'll talk about more of that in a second. But they shot just 42% from the field. They had 19 turnovers, and they took down the Minnesota Timberwolves for the second time this season. It's kind of interesting how they've played Minnesota 3 times in their first 7 games. But the San Antonio Spurs are doing something called creating a culture. And we know Coach Pop. We know San Antonio has had some very successful cultures in their tenure together. I guess that statement didn't make sense. The Spurs have had a bunch of good cultures. Popovich has established a bunch of good cultures for the Spurs. Keldon Johnson, one of the big question marks heading into this season was, is the franchise player currently on the Spurs? A lot of people, and myself included, I feel a little embarrassed here, I don't think so. Now, with that being said, that doesn't mean any of their new draft picks or Keldon Johnson or Devin Vassell could establish themselves as a franchise player. That's what we're seeing right now with Keldon Johnson. Keldon Johnson has, we'll start off with last night's stat line. Plus 20, but he had 25 points, 6 rebounds, 8 assists. Shot 5 of 10 from downtown, 8 of 15 from the field. Keldon Johnson has embraced this new role as you're the guy just fully. He's embraced it fully. And he is doing a phenomenal job right now for the San Antonio Spurs. Spurs fans knew Keldon was good, right? Good, solid NBA fans also knew Keldon was good. But we're seeing Keldon right here, right now, ascend to that next level. Watching the San Antonio Spurs this season has been very, very fun. I would say that the way they look right now, with the talent they have on their team as well, even guys like Zach Collins doing a phenomenal job off of the bench, Josh Richardson, Romeo Langford. He didn't have the best shooting night last night, but if you didn't catch last night's game, 7.7 rebounds, but he had 2 steals, he had a block. He was always in the right place at the right time. He had some huge defensive stops late in the game. He was cutting like a madman. He was just literally always in the right place at the right time. So it's these culture-setting pieces. It's these hungry players. A lot of these guys have chips on their shoulder, like Zach Collins, Romeo Langford, where it didn't work out on their initial team, and the team that drafted them or the team that they were previously on has kind of given up on them. Well, they're taking that with a grain of salt. They're putting a chip on their shoulder, and they're playing their hearts out. That's something you can guarantee yourself when you watch the Spurs this season. I don't care if they were to fall off a cliff after this next week or so and end up with only 20 wins like everybody was projecting them to. They will play their hearts out, and they're going to give it their all, and they're going to try their hardest on both sides. Their defense has been severely underrated, and it starts with guys like Trey Jones. Trey Jones was a great defensive prospect coming out of Duke. It really came down to him getting the offense up. You have him, you have Vassell, you have Keldon Johnson, you have Jakob Poeltl, who last night really showed me this. If there was any confusion as far as how good is Jakob Poeltl, last night really proved to me, going up against Rudy Gobert, going up against Karl-Anthony Towns, who scored 15-ish points in the first, was shut down the rest of the game. You also have Naz Reid off of the bench. They're a big boy team. They have some big bodies on their squad, and Jakob Poeltl just dominated as far as getting rebounds, getting those defensive stops. Here's Jakob Poeltl's stat line last night. He only took 2 shots. Finished with 4 points, 14 rebounds, 4 assists, 2 steals, and 3 blocks. He is, to me, an undisputed top 5 defensive center in the NBA. You might be, this is off the dome. You might be able to argue if he's a top 5 center in the NBA in general, but the point is this: he's severely underrated, just like almost every single player on this basketball squad. Even last night, we saw Keita Bates-Diop coming out of Ohio State. I had high hopes for him because I figured just with his athleticism, his potential on both sides of the ball, that he was going to be, at worst, a solid role player in the NBA. That's what he's looking like right now with San Antonio. Last night wasn't the most efficient game, 6 of 15 from the field, finished with 18 points, 6 rebounds, 2 of them were offensive. Keita Bates, especially in the fourth quarter when San Antonio started the quarter off, their fourth quarter pretty slow. The offense was a little stagnant. They weren't making their shots at all. Keita Bates it was at least 2 and 1 buckets right below the rim that were just huge for him. I mean, they were huge for him. And then once the starters came in, once Keldon came in, they kind of kept their foot on the gas there. But my point is, you have 19 turnovers. We knew turnovers, and we've seen turnovers be an issue for San Antonio this season. We knew that they were going to be sloppy at times. But they're still taking down contending teams. That's the thing. They're taking down, they lost to Charlotte to start off the season. Well, Charlotte actually has statistically one of the best offenses in the league this year. One of their other losses was to Minnesota. They're beating really good teams. You see this flag right here. This weekend, they took down my Chicago Bulls. I mean, they're just playing good basketball. So they're right there. As far as I'm concerned, I won't keep them in the top 6. Sorry, Spurs fans. Please hit that like button, hit that sub button if you guys want more Spurs and NBA content in general. But I would say they're closer to the play-in tournament than they are to the lottery. Like, if that makes sense. Like, I think they're closer to being in the 10th seed than having the first overall pick. And, I could go on a whole nother tangent saying Victor Wembanyama's had 3 major surgeries in the last year and a half. I mean, you want to establish winning cultures, right? You have to establish winning cultures. If you want free agents to come in, if you want your players to do their best, if you want everybody to be happy, you got to establish these cultures, and that's exactly what we're seeing right here, right now. As Popovich alluded to at the start of the season, don't go to Vegas and bet on us to win the NBA Finals, but they're blowing everybody away. We've seen a little bit of Blake Wesley. Last night we saw Malachi Branham. It's next man up. It's literally next man up for this team, and every next man has stepped up. Jeremy Sohan's finally starting to get his footing. Devin Vassell is a 20-point-per-game scorer right now, just like Keldon Johnson. I mean, Keldon Johnson might genuinely be the franchise player for the San Antonio Spurs. If you had to say it right now, he's a franchise guy right here, right now. That's the answer. That's how good he has started this season. There's a lot of bright days coming for San Antonio. I would imagine it's a long season, so with every team in the NBA, there's going to be some tough nights when you watched it, but the fact they were able to hold Minnesota with their defense is so underrated. The fact they were able to hold Minnesota, one of the quote-unquote best teams in the NBA heading into this season, to 98 points, turned the ball over 19 times and shot 42% without Vassell, without Sohan, without Richardson, without Roby. I mean, it just shows me a lot. It shows me a lot. So, great start to the season for San Antonio. We're 2 weeks in and they're 5-2. I think Spurs fans will take that. So hit that like button, hit that sub button. If you guys want more Spurs content, show some love down below. I mean, shout out Spurs fans. You guys have just, every Spurs video I make, you guys bless it. So I appreciate you guys so much. I love learning a little bit more about what you guys think down below in the comments. So please give your opinions down below. That's it from me. Peace.